right, so meetings, gotta love them, right?
I'm not sure everyone would say love.
Uh-huh, yeah, fair point. But we all have them, and we've all been in those meetings that are just, well, painful, the kind that make you wonder if 5 minutes of email wouldn't have done the trick.
Oh, absolutely. Death by PowerPoint, anyone.
Exactly. So today, we're on a mission to figure out how to make meetings, if not lovable, at least a little less terrible.
I like that goal. Less terrible is definitely achievable.
Right. And to help us on this quest, we're diving deep into a guide called, get this, How to End Meetings Once and for All.
Wow, that's pretty
Yeah,
ambitious.
you know, right? Maybe ending all meetings is a bit extreme.
Yeah, I mean, some meetings DO serve a purpose.
Totally agree. But this guide is really about cutting out the bad meetings, the ones that waste everyone's time and energy.
And finding ways to make the necessary ones more efficient and effective.
Exactly. So, you ready to get into it?
Absolutely, let's do this.
Awesome. Okay, so before we jump into the nitty-gritty tips and tricks, I think it's helpful to step back and ask a fundamental question, like why are we even having all these meetings in the first place?
That's a great question. And one that's often overlooked. We just sort of accept meetings as a part of work life.
Right. It's like they're just baked into the system.
And, the guide actually addresses that head on.
Hmm.
It emphasizes the importance of what it calls reciprocal communication.
Reciprocal communications. No, that sounds fancy. What does that actually mean in the context of meetings?
Basically, it means that meetings shouldn't just be about one person talking at everyone else.
Right. We've all been in those meetings where it's just a lecture.
Exactly. It's about creating a space for genuine dialogue, where everyone feels heard and can contribute their ideas.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not just about information delivery, it's about interaction and collaboration.
Exactly. And the guide argues that when meetings fail to achieve that kind of reciprocal communication, they're essentially pointless.
They become time wasters, basically.
Exactly. And nobody wants that.
No, definitely not. Okay, so we've established the why behind meetings, at least in theory. But in practice, how do we actually create that engaging, interactive environment where everyone feels comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas?
Well, one of the first steps, according to the guide, is understanding the different types of meetings.
Types of meetings. That's interesting. I guess I've never really thought about meetings having distinct categories.
Yeah, it's not something we typically think about. But the guide breaks them down into four main types: informative, consultative, decision-making, and formative.
Okay, so let's unpack those a bit. Informative meetings, I assume those are pretty straightforward.
Yeah, those are basically about sharing information. Think of it like a presentation or a briefing. The goal is to ensure everyone understands the information being shared.
Makes sense. What about consultative meetings?
Those are a bit different. They're more about gathering input and perspective.
Okay, so like brainstorming sessions, focus groups, that sort of thing.
Exactly. The goal is to get a range of opinions and ideas on a particular topic.
And then decision-making meetings, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory.
Yep. That's where the goal is to, well, make a decision. You're coming together to weigh options, debate the pros and cons, and ultimately reach a consensus or a majority vote.
And what about that last one, formative? What are those all about?
Formative meetings are all about, shaping and developing something. They're often used for things like project planning, training sessions, or team building exercises.
So they're kind of like workshops, where the goal is to learn and grow together as a group.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see how understanding these different types of meetings can be helpful. It's like having a roadmap before you even start the journey.
Exactly. Knowing the type of meeting you're having can help you set the right tone, structure the agenda effectively, and ensure everyone's on the same page.
It's about aligning expectations and setting the stage for a more productive and engaging experience.
Absolutely. And, the guide doesn't stop there. It goes even deeper, arguing that a meeting actually begins long before everyone gathers in the room.
Wait, really? What do they mean by that?
Well, think about it. If you invite the wrong people to a meeting, haven't clearly communicated its purpose, or haven't given people time to prepare.
You're already setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. It's like inviting people to a dinner party without telling them what kind of food you're serving.
Or giving them a heads up about any dietary restrictions.
Right. You're just asking for trouble.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So what are some concrete things we can do to properly set the table for a successful meeting, so to speak?
Well, the guide outlines 3 key steps. First, be thoughtful about who you invite. Make sure everyone present has a genuine reason to be there and can contribute to the discussion.
Right. No more inviting people just because it's protocol or because you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
Exactly. Second, provide ample notice. The guide actually recommends 10 to 15 days for formal meetings.
Wow, that seems like a lot.
It might seem excessive, but it allows people time to gather their thoughts, do any necessary research, and come prepared to actively engage.
Okay, I can see the value in that. And the third step.
Clearly communicate the meeting's purpose, the topics to be covered, and the expected outcomes. That way, everyone knows what they're walking into and what's expected of them.
It's about setting those expectations up front and giving people the information they need to contribute effectively.
Exactly. And, it's amazing how often these simple steps are overlooked.
Right. We rush into meetings without giving much thought to the preparation beforehand.
And then we wonder why they're so unproductive or frustrating.
It's like trying to bake a cake without a recipe.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've chosen the right participants, given them ample notice, and clearly communicated the purpose. We're off to a good start. But here's something I've always wondered. Does the actual meeting environment matter? Like the physical space where the meeting takes place?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the guy gets into some fascinating details about how the physical space can influence our behavior and communication patterns.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this meeting environment magic.
Well, for starters, the guide strongly recommends what it calls a horizontal setup.
Horizontal setup. What does that mean?
Basically, it means that everyone is literally on the same level. No one is towering over others at a giant conference table, which can create a sense of hierarchy and inhibit open communication.
Now that you mention it, I've definitely noticed that in meetings. When everyone is seated at the same level, it feels more collaborative and less intimidating.
Exactly. And it's not just about the seating arrangement. The guide also highlights other factors, like ensuring there's ample space. They recommend a minimum of 2 square meters per person.
Wow, that's a lot of space. But I guess it makes sense if you want people to feel comfortable and focused.
Right. And then there's adequate lighting, good soundproofing, and of course, ensuring the space is accessible and has all the necessary technical equipment.
Right, you don't want people fumbling with cords or struggling to hear the presentation.
Exactly. All of these elements contribute to creating an environment that's conducive to clear thinking, open communication, and productive collaboration.
Okay, so we've chosen the right participants, given them ample notice, clearly communicated the purpose, and set up a welcoming and functional space. What happens next? Like, how does the meeting actually run?
This is where the guide gets super practical with its step-by-step meeting mechanics. Think of it as a roadmap for ensuring your meeting runs smoothly and achieves its objectives.
All right, I'm ready for that roadmap. What's the first stop on our meeting journey?
Introductions. It might seem obvious, but the guide emphasizes the importance of starting with introductions, especially if there are new participants.
Right, you don't want anyone feeling lost or left out.
Exactly. It's about making everyone feel welcome and comfortable, which can go a long way in fostering a positive and collaborative atmosphere.
Totally agree. There's nothing worse than feeling like you're the only one who doesn't know what's going on.
Right. And once everyone is acquainted, the next step is to review the objectives and the agenda.
Okay, so we're setting the stage, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. This might seem obvious, but it's crucial for keeping the meeting focused and on track.
Okay, so we've got introductions and agenda review out of the way. Now we're getting to the meat of the meeting, right? What does the guide say about presenting the actual topics?
The guide emphasizes clarity and conciseness. It's about presenting information in a way that's easy to understand and digest.
So no rambling monologues or death by PowerPoint presentations.
Exactly. This is where things like visual aids, clear language, and a structured approach can be really helpful.
Right. And I guess this is also where those meeting types we discussed earlier come into play again, right? The way you present a topic in an informative meeting might be very different from how you present it in a consultative or decision-making meeting.
Exactly. In an informative meeting, you might focus on delivering a clear and concise presentation, followed by time for clarifying questions.
Right, just getting the information across efficiently.
But in a consultative meeting, you might present a problem or challenge and then open the floor for discussion and brainstorming.
Okay, so you're tailoring the presentation style to the type of meeting and the desired outcome. What happens after we've presented the topic and had some discussion? What's the next step on our meeting roadmap?
Well, this is where things can get interesting because it really depends on the type of meeting. For informative meetings, you might move on to the next topic after addressing any clarifying questions. But for consultative and decision-making meetings, There are additional steps involved.
Okay, let's break those down. What happens in a consultative meeting after the initial presentation and discussion?
Well, one important step is summarizing the different perspectives and opinions that have been shared.
So it's not just about having a free-flowing discussion, it's about actively listening, capturing those key points, and making sure everyone's voice is represented.
Exactly. This can help identify any areas of agreement or disagreement, which can guide further discussion.
Makes sense. And then for decision-making meetings.
Well, there's a whole process outlined for actually making those decisions.
Okay, so it's not just about hoping a decision magically emerges from the chaos.
Right. It might involve negotiation, consensus building, or even a formal vote, depending on the situation.
So it's about having a structured approach to decision-making rather than just letting things happen organically.
Absolutely.
And regardless of the meeting type, I imagine the guide emphasizes ending with clear action items.
You know it.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just talk about things. You need to assign responsibilities, set deadlines, and make sure everyone knows what needs to happen next.
Right. Otherwise, it's all just talk.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're cruising along on our meeting roadmap. We've got our introductions, agenda review, topic presentations, discussions, summaries, decisions, and action items. But who's steering this ship? Who's making sure we stay on course and reach our destination?
That's where the moderator comes in. And the guide dedicates a significant section to outlining the moderator's role and responsibilities.
Ooh, the moderator. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this meeting maestro. What are their key functions?
Well, the guide highlights three primary functions. First, asking the right questions to guide the discussion.
So they're not just there to keep time, they're actively shaping the conversation.
Exactly. Second, they're responsible for actively listening and recording key points.
Taking notes, making sure nothing gets lost in the shuffle.
Right. And third, they need to synthesize information to facilitate decision-making.
So they're kind of like the conductor of an orchestra, making sure all the different instruments are playing in harmony.
Love that analogy.
Yeah.
And what's important is that a good moderator isn't there to dominate the conversation or impose their own opinions.
Right. They're not the boss of the meeting.
Exactly. Their role is to empower the group, to facilitate a productive and engaging dialogue, and to ensure everyone feels heard and respected.
Okay, so we've got our moderator, our agenda, our carefully curated environment, and our well-defined meeting mechanics. But what about the human element? What about the different personalities and dynamics that can make or break a meeting?
Yes. The guide knows that no meeting is complete without its cast of characters, and it provides a hilarious and insightful section called the Character Gallery.
Oh, I love this. Tell me more about these meeting personalities.
Well, there's the non-listener, for
Yeah.
example. The person who's always formulating their next point instead of actually paying attention to what's being said.
Oh, we've all met that person, the one who's clearly miles away, even though they're physically present.
Exactly. Then there's the interrupter, the one who can derail a conversation faster than you can say agenda item.
Ugh, yes, the conversation killer. Always jumping in before anyone else can finish a thought.
And of course, there's the attention seeker, the one who always wants to be the star of the show, regardless of the topic.
The one who sees every meeting as an opportunity to perform.
You got it.
Okay, these are so relatable. I think we've all encountered these personalities in meetings. So how does the guide recommend handling these characters? Like, how do you manage them without shutting down their contributions or creating an awkward confrontation?
Well, it's all about finding the right balance. You want to encourage participation, but also maintain a productive and respectful environment.
Right, you don't want to stifle anyone's voice, but you also need to keep things on track.
Exactly. It's a delicate dance.
So, for example, let's say you've got the interrupter in your meeting. How do you manage that without making them feel like they're being silenced?
One technique is to gently acknowledge their enthusiasm while redirecting the conversation. You could say something like, "That's a great point, and we'll definitely come back to it, but right now we're focusing on."
Okay, so it's about validating their contribution while also keeping the meeting on track.
Exactly.
What about the non-listener? How do you engage someone who's clearly not present in the moment?
Sometimes, direct questions can be effective. Try calling on them by name and asking for their thoughts on a specific point.
Putting them on the spot a little bit.
Just a little nudge to bring them back into the fold. And sometimes, even just making eye contact and giving them a nod can be enough.
Those are great strategies. It's about finding ways to gently nudge people back into the conversation without making them feel singled out or embarrassed. Okay, so we've talked about those more, shall we say, colorful meeting personalities. But what happens when things get really heated? Because let's be honest, conflict is almost inevitable in meetings. How does the guide address that?
It's true. Where there are people, there's bound to be some disagreement.
Uh-huh.
And, the guide doesn't shy away from this reality. It actually dedicates a whole section to conflict resolution.
Okay, good. Because conflict avoidance is definitely not a recipe for a productive meeting.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that conflict, when handled constructively, can actually lead to better solutions and stronger team cohesion.
Right. It's about seeing conflict as an opportunity, not a threat.
Exactly. So how does the guide recommend we handle those moments when everyone's ready to throw their laptops out the window? Well, it provides a clear step-by-step approach. First, acknowledge the conflict openly and directly. Don't try to brush it under the rug or pretend it's not happening.
Okay, so name the elephant in the room.
Exactly. Then assess the severity of the conflict and the participants' willingness to resolve it. Sometimes a simple misunderstanding can be quickly clarified. Other times, deeper issues need to be addressed.
Okay, so we've acknowledged the conflict, we've assessed the situation, then what?
The next step is to brainstorm all possible solutions, analyzing their costs and benefits.
Okay, so we're encouraging collaborative problem solving.
Exactly. And finally, you need to make a decision, either through negotiation and consensus, or, if necessary, by a majority vote.
So it's about having a structured approach to conflict resolution, just like we have a structured approach to decision making.
Exactly. And it's about creating a safe space where people feel comfortable expressing their opinions, even if they disagree.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about why we have meetings, the different types of meetings, the importance of pre-meeting prep, setting the right environment, effective meeting mechanics, handling those tricky personalities, and even resolving conflict. That's a lot.
It's a comprehensive framework for sure. But, what strikes me is how much of this is applicable to any meeting, whether it's a formal board meeting or a casual team check-in.
Right. These aren't just tips for CEOs or project managers. These are strategies that anyone can use to make their meetings more effective.
Exactly. And, speaking of applicability, there's one big question that's been on my mind as we've been discussing this. The guide we're referencing, it focuses primarily on in-person meetings.
Right. But in today's world, so many of our meetings are happening online.
Exactly. So how do these principles apply to the virtual world? What unique challenges and opportunities do virtual meetings present?
That's a fantastic question, and it's one that we're going to tackle head on in the next part of this deep dive. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back after a short break to explore the wild world of virtual meetings. Okay, so we're stepping into the virtual world now. Meetings in our pajamas. Anyone.
Pretty much, yeah. Though I do try to at least put on a presentable shirt.
Haha, me too. But all jokes aside, I do wonder if it's even possible to achieve that same level of engagement and productivity when we're not physically in the same room.
It's definitely a challenge, I'll grant you that. But I actually think virtual meetings have some unique advantages too.
Like what? I have to admit, I'm a bit of a skeptic. I really miss those in-person interactions, being able to read the room, pick up on those subtle cues. You just don't get the same kind of spontaneous back and forth online.
I get it, those nonverbal cues are important. But think about it this way. Virtual meetings can actually level the playing field in some ways.
How so?
Well, in a physical room, you often have those people who naturally command more attention, right? Maybe they're more outgoing or just have a bigger presence.
Yeah, for sure.
But online, everyone has an equal opportunity to contribute, regardless of their personality or physical presence.
That's a good point.
And then there's the accessibility factor. Think about all the people who can participate in virtual meetings from anywhere in the world.
Right. No more travel time or logistical headaches. I've actually been able to connect with colleagues and experts from all over the globe thanks to virtual meetings. It's amazing when you think about it.
It really is. And let's not forget the time and cost savings. No commuting, no need to book those expensive conference rooms, and everyone can join from the comfort of their own workspace.
So there are definitely some perks, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But how do we take those principles we discussed earlier, like the different meeting types, the preparation, the moderator's role, and adapt them to this digital landscape?
I think preparation becomes even more crucial in the virtual world,
Oh,
actually.
really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, because you're dealing with potential technical issues, for one thing. And the communication environment is just less nuanced overall. So setting clear expectations and giving people all the information they need beforehand is absolutely essential.
It's like sending out a detailed virtual invitation, not just the time and location, but also the dress code, so to speak.
Mhm.
Everyone needs to know the rules of engagement, how to use the technology, what's expected of them.
Exactly. Send out a detailed agenda well in advance, including any relevant documents or links,
Right. Make sure everyone has the login information, knows how to use the meeting platform.
and understands the basic etiquette, too.
Right. And maybe even a quick tech check beforehand to avoid those "can you hear me now" moments. We've all been there, and it's not fun.
It's definitely not. And once the meeting actually starts, I think it's essential to be super mindful of engagement. It's just so much easier for people to tune out or get distracted when they're not physically present.
Oh, tell me about it. I've definitely been guilty of multitasking during virtual meetings. It's so tempting to check email or scroll through social media when you think no one can see you.
We're all human, but as a meeting organizer or participant, there are definitely things you can do to combat that. For one thing, keep those virtual meetings shorter and more focused. People's attention spans are just naturally shorter when they're staring at a screen.
That's a good point. Maybe instead of scheduling a 2-hour marathon meeting, break it down into a couple of shorter sessions, each with a specific objective.
Exactly. And think about incorporating interactive elements to keep people engaged. Use polls, quizzes, breakout sessions,
Ooh, breakout sessions. Those are fun.
right? Or even just simple check-in questions. Anything to encourage participation and make the meeting more dynamic.
Great ideas. It's all about finding ways to recreate that sense of energy and interaction you get in an in-person setting. But what about the moderator's role? Does that change at all in a virtual meeting?
It definitely evolves.
Yeah.
The moderator needs to be even more vigilant about managing the flow of conversation, making sure everyone has a chance to speak, and keeping things on track.
It's like being a digital traffic cop, making sure the information's flowing smoothly and no one gets lost in the virtual intersection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy for people to talk over each other or for the conversation to get sidetracked online.
True, true. And speaking of sidetracked conversations, what about those tricky personalities we talked about earlier? Do they manifest differently in the virtual world?
Oh, they absolutely do. The non-listener might become the camera-off multitasker, while the interrupter transforms into the chat box dominator.
Haha, I can totally see that happening. It's like they've found new digital playgrounds for their antics. So how do we deal with these virtual disruptors?
Establishing clear communication protocols up front can help a lot.
Like what?
For example, you might ask everyone to mute their microphones when they're not speaking, use the raise hand feature to indicate they want to contribute, or utilize the chat function for questions or comments.
It's about setting those ground rules, just like we do in an in-person meeting, but adapting them to the virtual environment.
Precisely. And I think it's also important to be mindful of different time zones and cultural norms when you're dealing with a global audience.
Oh, right. That's a big one.
Uh,
You might have people joining from all over the world, so being respectful of their time and their cultural background is essential.
Absolutely. Flexibility and sensitivity are key. You might need to adjust meeting times to accommodate different time zones or be aware of cultural differences in communication styles.
It's about being aware of those nuances and adapting our approach accordingly.
And beyond the practical tips and strategies, I think it's important to acknowledge the bigger picture here. The rise of virtual meetings has fundamentally changed the way we work and communicate.
It really has. It's a whole new world, and we're all still figuring out the rules of the game.
Exactly. We're seeing a blurring of boundaries between work and personal life, a greater emphasis on asynchronous communication, and a need for new skills and etiquette for navigating this digital workplace.
It's like we're creating a whole new language for how we connect and collaborate.
And that raises some important questions. How do we maintain a sense of community and connection when we're interacting primarily through screens? How do we prevent burnout and maintain healthy boundaries in a world where work can follow us anywhere?
Those are huge questions, and I don't think there are easy answers, but I do think it starts with being mindful of the human element, even in a virtual setting.
I completely agree. It's about remembering that we're all individuals with our own needs, preferences, and challenges.
And it's about finding ways to build relationships, foster trust, and create a sense of belonging, even when we're not physically together.
Perhaps that's the most important takeaway from this part of our deep dive. It's not just about learning tips and tricks for running better virtual meetings. It's about engaging in a deeper reflection on how we communicate, collaborate, and connect in this rapidly changing world.
Well said. But you know what? There's one crucial element we haven't discussed yet, and it's the elephant in the virtual room, so to speak.
I think I know where you're going with this. You're talking about time, aren't you?
You got it.
Yeah.
It's the reason we all secretly dread meetings, even the well-planned ones. They can feel like such a time suck, especially when they're not managed effectively.
You're absolutely right. And, our guide doesn't shy away from this issue. It actually tackles it head on with a whole section on time management, both for in-person and virtual meetings.
Okay, I'm ready to hear what they have to say. Let's dive into those time-saving strategies. So, time management, the ultimate meeting challenge. How do we wrestle back control of our calendars and stop feeling like we're drowning in meeting invites?
It's funny. The guide actually connects time management back to that core principle of reciprocal communication.
Really? How so?
Well, remember, a truly effective meeting isn't just about delivering information. It's about genuine back and forth, that active engagement.
Right, right. So if a meeting isn't achieving that, it's not just inefficient, it's basically failing its fundamental purpose.
Exactly. It's like having a car that's stuck in neutral. The engine might be running, but you're not actually going anywhere.
Love that analogy. So how do we get those meeting engines firing on all cylinders and actually moving in the right direction?
Well, the guide introduces this idea of meeting hygiene, which I think is brilliant.
Meeting hygiene. I've never heard that before. What does that even mean?
It basically means treating meetings with the same care and attention we give to other important aspects of our work.
Okay, I like that. So just like we wouldn't show up to a client presentation unprepared or submit a sloppy report, we shouldn't approach meetings haphazardly.
Exactly. It's about being intentional and thoughtful. So how do we put meeting hygiene into practice? Well, it starts with being ruthlessly honest about necessity.
You mean asking ourselves, do we really need this meeting?
Exactly. Could the objectives be achieved through email, a shared document, or a quick phone call? Sometimes the best meeting is the one that never happens.
Truth. So let's say we've determined that, yes, a meeting I is necessary. What's next?
Then we need to be laser focused on the meeting's purpose and desired outcomes. Ask yourself, what specific decisions need to be made? What information needs to be shared? What actions do we want people to take after the meeting?
Right. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And I'm guessing those meeting types we discussed earlier also come into play here.
Absolutely. Knowing whether it's an informative, consultative, or decision-making meeting will inform your approach to time management.
Makes sense. So an informative meeting might be pretty quick, while a complex decision-making meeting could require a lot more time.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
And it's totally okay to schedule shorter meetings. We don't have to fill an hour just because that's the default on our calendars.
I love that you said that. It's about being realistic and efficient.
Exactly. Okay, so we've determined the purpose, the type, and the necessary length of the meeting. What else can we do to keep things on track and avoid those time-sucking black holes?
Once you've set the schedule, be strict about sticking to it. Start and end on time, even if it means postponing some discussion points for a follow-up.
It's about setting those boundaries, not just for yourself, but for the entire group.
Absolutely. It shows respect for everyone's time. And speaking of follow-up, that's another crucial aspect of meeting hygiene that often gets overlooked.
Right. It's not enough to just have the meeting. We need to make sure the meeting's outcomes actually translate into action.
Exactly. Document those decisions, assign those action items with clear deadlines, and make sure to track progress.
Close the loop, basically. Make sure things actually get done.
Exactly. You might even want to schedule a brief follow-up meeting to review progress and address any outstanding issues. It's about accountability and ensuring that the meeting's momentum doesn't fizzle out.
Okay, so we've talked about being ruthless about necessity, being crystal clear about purpose, sticking to the schedule, and following up effectively. But what about those moments when a meeting starts to go off the rails? You know, those tangents, rabbit holes, and side conversations that can suck up precious time. How do we course correct without completely derailing the process?
This is where a skilled moderator can really shine. They can gently guide the conversation back to the agenda, summarize key points to refocus the group, or even suggest a parking lot for tangential topics that can be addressed later.
Ooh, a parking lot for ideas. I like that. It's a holding pen for those brilliant but off-topic thoughts that threaten to hijack the meeting.
Exactly. And sometimes it's even necessary to call a timeout if the discussion becomes too heated or unproductive.
Right. Sometimes you just need to hit the pause button, take a deep breath, and come back with a fresh perspective.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the psychology of meetings to practical tips for improving our meeting hygiene, both in person and online. We've explored the why, the how, the who, and even the when of meetings. But as we wrap up, I think it's worth circling back to that human element we discussed earlier. Because at the end of the day, meetings are about people.
Absolutely. They're about people connecting, collaborating, and creating something together. It's easy to get caught up in the mechanics, the agendas, the time management strategies, but we shouldn't forget about the power of human interaction.
Well said. Meetings at their best can be spaces for innovation, inspiration, and genuine connection.
They can be where ideas are sparked, relationships are forged, and progress is made.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So, dear listener, as you embark on your next meeting, remember that you have the power to make it a positive and productive experience. Be prepared, be focused, be respectful of everyone's time, and don't be afraid to have a little fun along the way.
After all, life's too short for bad meetings.
And who knows? You might even find yourself looking forward to your next one. Now, that would be a true meeting revolution.
Wouldn't it just